we've got a great panel lined up, and we've already looked at some of the questions that have been asked from the floor, and so we're going to make this as informal as possible. And if my former boss can't control the House of Commons, why should I control this panel? But you know, first cut round, Tony's going to talk about business intelligence. We had a lot of questions from you about that, and then Tracey's going to talk about some of the cultural issues that this really draws for us. Girish is going to talk about the approach that leads take to pulling these things together. And then finally, Caron at the end is going to talk to some of your questions about, well, how do we judge success here? What are we really trying to achieve? Anyway, that's what I'd like you to talk about first time around. You talk about what you like, really. Tony, business intelligence, what's it all about then?
Thanks very much, Rob. So I think we had a series of questions around really what is business intelligence, and partly how do you separate it from artificial intelligence? Where's the sort of break point? So I think business intelligence, like any number of labels in the technology sector, can mean many things to many people, but in its simplest form, it's essentially a broad range of tools that will allow you to collect, consume, analyze, and then present data. And really, the gift of BI is in that presentation layer. Its task is to make the consumption of data to humans more simplified, more streamlined, more targeted. It's there to support decision making in people. It's there to provide fast access to information, the right information, enabling decision makers, team members to take those decisions with more certainty, perhaps even than they've done before. And I think that in that way, business intelligence can apply itself to historic data. So we can be looking backwards over many years worth of data, seeing trends, using that trend to inform current decision making, providing opinions to us that will help us in decision making. Or it can be looking at last month's data, and we talked about productivity. It can be just letting us know how we got on in comparison to this time last year or the month before. It can be any number of ways of presenting that historical data. And it can be looking at current data as well. So it can be looking at sort of emerging trends or emerging features of data sets, call volumes in a contact center. What's happening now? It can alert us to emerging events so we can be more current. We can start preparing more early for potential challenges in the workplace or indeed in our personal lives as a result of having intelligent tools providing us with data. And it moves also into the world of predictive data as well. So it can look at some of these historic trends, it can understand the current set of events, and perhaps it can start helping us to model a series of what-if scenarios. So you might be using business intelligence to maybe create a tool which allows you to say, if I change the frequency with which I maintain assets that are set out in the field, if I change the frequency of that, what's that going to do for me? If I sort of model this so I perform more frequent maintenance checks or less frequent maintenance checks, what's that going to do for me? Certainly it'll increase or decrease the cost of your planned maintenance cycle. What it will also do, though, is change the sort of mean time between failure of some of those assets. And there's a cost associated with that. So it can help you model, maybe, from the data that it understands, it can help you model what that might look like. So it can do some predictive work for you. But it really is fundamentally this tool that helps you model things. And more important than anything else, it is this tool that lets the people make the decision. So simplistically, where I see the separation with AI is that AI holds the promise of so much more, as Jim has alluded to in his presentation as well, stated clearly in his presentation. I think that we got in AI, it promises to go beyond that set of rules. So in BI, we have to have clever techs and clever people who understand what they want to get out of that technology. And what are the factors that are going to really, so if I change my maintenance cycle, actually, what are the factors that are going to mean there's a change in the cost of delivering a service? With AI and machine learning particularly, if we feed it enough data, then it takes on the decision-making capability. It starts to think about bits of data that we didn't understand actually affected the cost profile of changing my maintenance cycle. And it starts to think its way through and add more data into that decision-making process. And perhaps it goes as far as actually taking the decision. And I think just last thoughts before passing on, and maybe a bit of a segue, Tracey, into your part, I think that gives everyone in this room quite an interesting cultural challenge. Because whereas BI is very much in support of existing jobs, AI has the capacity to transform those jobs, take some of the decision-making away from what has effectively been, I think, for everyone in this room, run a series of organizations that have very much had at their heart for a long time the concept that particularly knowledgeable and experienced people will understand what's going on with the provision of a service and will see data and will understand, have a feel for what needs to be done next. Whereas we are moving towards a more measured set of data that says, actually, this is the path you ought to take. There's a cultural issue with how you move to trusting the machine enough to allow it to help us to do more efficient jobs.
Thanks for that, Tom. I think that's right. I mean, I've read somewhere that if you need to turn an aircraft carrier around quite quickly, it takes something like several miles, 5 or 6 miles to turn it round, and if you have to execute that manoeuvre, then it will be listing at 30 degrees, so everybody's got to be holding on pretty tight. And the fact is, I think everybody will have experienced change and trying to deliver change within their teams and their organisations. And no matter how good the technology, if it's a technology-based change, or how clearly the chief executive or political leadership want that change to happen, we know that actually it's the detail, the devil's in the detail, and teams in many cases will feel very threatened by those changes, won't they? There'll be jobs that they've always done, they've invested in, they've improved, they're proud of the processes, the way they work, the way they deal with customers currently. So to hear that we're going to roll out changes and computers, virtual workers are actually going to carry out part of these processes. We're not necessarily suggesting all of them, but part of these processes is quite scary. And that means we've got to have really excellent leadership throughout the organisation, so throughout all of the tiers. And I think we really need to make sure that actually we're embracing customers' views and we're embracing employees' views and getting them involved right from the outset. So really understanding what customers value, because some of these processes don't need to be automated, they need to be stopped, quite honestly. We've been doing things historically, we've been doing for 30 years, and nobody's thought about actually whether or not that's a valuable step. Printing off, we were talking earlier on, printing off PDF to put a piece of information on it, to then scan it in, to send it to somebody else who may then print it off again. Well, and nobody knows why we put your example, wasn't it? Why we put the barcode or whatever information on it in the first place. So we've got lots of examples where staff and teams will really want to hold on to their traditional way of working. And we need everybody involved. If they're involved at the beginning, can understand the value and understand where their role fits in. What does it mean for them and their work and how they're valued in the organisation going forward. Get them involved in the design, get them involved in every stage, listen to the feedback and make those changes continuously. And for me, I think we need to see these types of change projects as marathons and not sprints. So this is unstoppable. This is with us now, isn't it? We can't go back and say we're actually not going to play this game. I've been probably working on technology change projects, and that's as an environmental health officer in the public sector for getting on for 18 to 20 years now. It's not gone away. The pace is accelerating, as we all know. But we need to look at this as we are constantly evolving and improving the kind of services we deliver, and using virtual workers, using digitization and other technologies is just another element of the way our organisations need to be shaped.
Thank you. Girish.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk to you what approach we've taken in Leeds over the last 5 years and how we've tried to move towards 100% digital and become a smart city. And there's been a lot of conversation today about the data that we hold and AI and all the technologies that are coming. And they're all important things, and I don't think people actually realise the volume of data that we hold within our organisation and how valuable that data is. And there was once our chief officer for IT once said, data is the future crude oil. And that's the value of data that we hold, and I think that's really, really important. And I just want to take you through a journey where we started about 5 years ago looking at our data and how could we use our data in the public arena to enable partners in the city and allow developers to come in and use our operational data to then deliver better outcomes for the city rather than us doing everything for our citizens. So we've developed what we call the Open Data Institute in Leeds. It was done in partnership with Leeds City Council. It's now independently funded and it gets grant from central government, etc. This journey takes about 6 months. What we do is we have an outcome we want to achieve, and the one I'm going to use is we wanted to stop sending out letters to our citizens in Leeds every time there was a change to the bin collection date. Simple as that. Each time we had a change to a date, it was costing us £90,000 to send out a letter. And the outcome was, how can we stop sending those letters out? So we decided to try and use the Open Data Institute. And the difficulty I had, and we've just talked about cultural change in the organisation and buying from members to people who deal with the operational service itself, was, can we release the data? And you won't believe the difficulties we had around, can we release the data? Why do you want to touch our data? It's our data. What's going to happen to the data once it's out in the public arena? Well, it's out in the public arena. It took us months to get sign-off from service leads, members, including directors, to release operational data. Yes, it had to be fit for purpose. Yes, we had to comply with privacy and GDPR and all that sort of stuff. We eventually released it into the ODI. Now, once it's out there, it's out there. You can log on to the ODI in Leeds and you can view any data sets that we have published. And the first principle was, by releasing this data, hopefully it would help us reduce FOIs, so freedom of information stuff, which it has done, because the data's out there. So the level of inquiries we get now, they've been reduced. Going back to the bin stuff, we held an event where we invited developers in from around the UK. They came. We had operational people, not IT professionals, operational people, talking about what outcome they wanted to achieve. And the first outcome was, we want to get rid of these letters, but we want to engage with our citizens and inform them regular with updates that help them put the right bin out at the right time, tell them where their local recycling centre is, what they can recycle, etc., etc. Within 4 hours of that conversation with a room full of developers and the operational data being public, we had a concept. In the afternoon, those concepts were presented back to us, and then in the following 3 months, we then sat down with operational services to say, which concept do we want to take forward? We took that forward. That took us another 6 months. And the reason it took us 6 months, it goes back to this organisational change. They didn't want to let go. They still felt that we should get a Civica involved, and we should buy this application from a provider, and we should have it completely integrated. Yeah, Open Data helped us deliver this app for less than £5,000. We eventually launched the app through our chief exec, internally to our users, and now it's I've forgotten the numbers now, but it's in the tens of thousands that use the app. It is completely free. It cost us £5,000. And since then, we've used the same principle to develop other apps. The most recent one has been the housing picker, where we have a huge volume of people contacting our contact centre to inquire about waiting times for council houses. Why can't we just put that data out there? Why can't we just let them put their circumstances in? And it's a pivot table in the background, which then presents them back the average waiting time for council housing by area based on what they've put in. Stops them ringing us. That's another example of where we've used open data in the city with partners, and it's not been developed by Leeds City Council or a large vendor. It's been developed by individual developers. And yes, you can have some contracts in place where they will provide support for the following for about 2 to 3 years. Yes, it does have a risk element that it's not supported by a large vendor, but that's the risk we've taken, and so far it's paid off. The other stuff we're also doing in terms of connectivity, which is massive. As a local authority, we've started building houses again. Did about 1,300 last year. But on that journey, we had to define what does a Leeds house look like these days. We talked about the 4th emerging element of gas, water, electric. Well, broadband connectivity is the fourth thing that we need. So we developed a Leeds housing standard, which is actually a specification of what should be in our property besides gas, water, electric. So every new build now has ducting. Doesn't mean that we're providing the connectivity, but we're putting the ducting in, which we can resell. But it also means that we can look at affordable fibre. And we're doing some trials in south of the city where we're using third-party companies to help us with low-end broadband, to provide facilities for our tenants at low cost. It's a two-way thing. We can push information out to them, but more importantly, it will enable us to deliver Internet of Things going forward. So, for example, technologies in the house which will monitor damp, for example, which will then help with our disrepairs bill, smart metering, for example. But in the future, we'll also then link to independent living agendas with motion sensors and stuff like that. So that's happening as we speak. We're just about to embark on a project called CIPFA, where at the moment we've got so many of us in different directorates all looking at connectivity in the city. So one of the priorities to becoming a 100% digital and a smarter city going forward is we're looking at Lauraland. I know a lot of people will be looking at that. We're looking at smart lighting. Well, as soon as we start looking at smart lighting, which means we can put a node on there, we can start enabling connectivity, which means we can start connecting Internet of Things up. And that's our plan going forward. So we've got three priorities for the city. One of them is housing growth and the connectivity. The other one is smart transport, and we've already started looking at smart parking using open data, and we're trialling that in Leeds at the moment. And we're looking at social care, working with our partners in the city, where we're looking to move towards a single care record, and that's in motion as well. So that's what we're doing. We have a smart city setup, which has partners across the city, NHS, university, and us, working as one team to deliver these smart outcomes for the city. So if anybody wants more information, please come and speak to me. There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on indeed.
Yeah.
Caron, really interested to ask you how we evaluate success here. What does good look like? What are your thoughts, and what do you see happening in Northern Ireland and beyond?
So I guess I want to turn it around slightly from that, because actually before you can even measure your success, you actually have to ensure that you get successful in some way. And actually even before that, what does success look like? In Northern Ireland terms for central government, it was about making citizen services better. And that was across the whole of the public sector. It was about crossing the organisational silos and trying to do something in a different way to actually give the citizen a better outcome. And some of the things that we did and we've learned on our journey in terms of the last 4.5 to 5 years, I've been responsible for driving that transformational programme of work. One of the biggest things we started by doing was stopped replacing computer systems. And that was a huge culture shock, just to go back to something that Tracey was saying. That was a huge shift in culture, because business cases were typically designed around something that was coming to the end of life. And we took that opportunity to say, those types of business cases will not get approved anymore if there's a citizen aspect to it. And we want you to actually redesign and digitally transform your services end to end, and have the focus around the citizen, the person, the pupil, the patient. Doesn't really matter. But that shift had to change from using basically technological solution to do one thing, to actually start looking at a service, designing a total service end to end. And that meant actually taking a totally different approach. And again, it was a huge culture shock for many, because we adopted an agile approach to service delivery and service design. And that was a real game changer. That just absolutely changed the speed of delivery, changed how we looked at our services, and actually engaged with the business owners. So again, it was about IT people, design solutions, they design great solutions, but actually they don't know the business. And it's the business people that know what the business is trying to achieve, and we ask the citizen, what is it that you expect our service to do for you? What is it that you want? So actually having that focus around people instead of around policies and structures of how government works. I work in central government, but actually my programme extends beyond central government into the wider public sector. The citizen doesn't care who is actually delivering that for them. All they want is the thing they want to be able to do and receive, whatever. But they don't care about our structure. So really it was simplifying that whole space and having that different approach. And agile for those, and I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted, because taking the agile approach instead of the old traditional waterfall and replacing computer systems, it actually changed a lot of things, and it means that the business takes control and that IT are there as part of the solution and engaging in a collaborative way with the business and making them take ownership and actually making them make the difficult decisions about the processes and how. Then technology comes in at the end to actually create something around that user journey. What I would say is, going back to where you started the question, which was about how do you measure and how, the reality is your business case at the very outset. So first of all, you need to know what it is you're trying to do, but your business cases, and there will be loads of them, because it's not just one business case, you have to have really good baseline metrics in them. And you have to really define how it is you are going to measure success. If it's not in that business case, it makes it very, very difficult to measure, and it makes it very, very difficult for you to show that you have actually made a difference. So really getting those baselines in place are really, really important. And again, having the capability and capacity within your organisation, not just relying all of the time on the supplier community and the industry to actually do it, basically do it for you. You want to be part of that process. So internal skills and digital skills are really, really important to make sure that there is a sense of ownership and a sense of belonging, and that you have been part of designing something that is fantastically wonderful for everybody. So I'll leave it at that point.
Oh, it's really interesting, thank you. Looking at your questions, folks, clearly people feel under a fair bit of pressure. There feels like a lot of threats out there. No government funding, reorganisation, both colleagues from housing and local government clearly seeing a lot of threats that could impact on your ability to change. It's interesting to ask you all how you think we can break out of that, or it's clearly going to be very difficult, is it? I'm sorry to be so depressing, but the one thing I can promise you is there isn't going to be a lot of money for a while, and I'm sorry to say that, and I wish it were otherwise, but because of the geo and national, political factors and economic factors I spoke about earlier, the one thing I can promise you is that more money isn't going to be part of your solution. So how can people act strategically, think about the long term, when actually a lot of colleagues feel under threat and under a huge amount of pressure, managing these very difficult short-term issues of no money? Tony?
I think some of the conversations we've had this morning over breakfast and last night over dinner have been on this very subject. And Tracey, you and I have had conversations in the past as well about the reality here is not doing everything tomorrow is part of that answer. Not doing everything you do today, tomorrow, is part of that answer. It's not necessarily stopping a service completely, but it's understanding actually how far can you take the simplification of some services, or indeed flipping the model and charging for services you previously haven't charged for. That eye towards income generation and being a provider to the public as well as as almost a caretaker of the public is an important part of that process. I perhaps have a bit of a bias here because I believe digital technology is a way to achieve that in terms of some of the simplification of processes, some of the automation of processes. I believe firmly that business intelligence and AI particularly are effectively gateway technologies to making those things happen. But still, a lot of the tough decisions are down to the service providers themselves to decide actually what is a relevant level of service.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen it, time and time and again. Some really hard decisions being made, particularly by secretarial, sort of county councils and unitaries, about having to prioritise adult social care, children's care. They've had to pare back on services that members of the public really value. But strangely, there's been quite a reasonable level of acceptance. I mean, simple things like grass cutting, highways verges, used to be cut, 8-9 times a year. Everything was neat and tidy. But now around most places you drive around and you'll see, quite shaggy looking roads, roadsides. Yeah. They're the kinds of simple decisions make money to reinvest into priorities. And it's the same here, really. I mean, we've embarked on we're continuing our journey in terms of transformation, which started a few years ago, but it's a combination of approaches. So it's about service reviews, looking at exactly what does the customer value, how productive are we, what are our costs, what could we or should we be switching off or delivering at a lower level? What do our political leaders want from us? What do they want to commission? Because they're the ones ultimately who are accountable when they get to the ballot box. We're looking at digitisation, getting information, getting forms, electronic forms in there so it can be used by virtual workers. We're looking at predictive analytics, we're changing the way we deal with performance data so that we can really understand what is adding value and where we should spend our time and effort. But the fact is, if we can get on with this quite quickly, then it is going to make that overarching financial pressure easier, because by making these changes, by being more productive, we can release resources. Now, in some cases, that'll be just simply to reduce the budget. I mean, that's the harsh reality. But in others, it'll be about reinvesting elsewhere. It'll be about reinvesting in economic growth projects, about creating more business rates income, creating more housing, generating income that way. And ultimately, we will get through this, this particular situation. It is difficult. It is difficult. But there are lots of examples of local authorities up and down the country who are following commercial agendas. And I don't mean just buying assets and getting a return on them, but actually creating commercial offers to sell out there, creating their own companies to do something that's completely outside of the normal scope of what a local authority does or can do. We've just got to be innovative, but you need to create the space for that to happen.
Yeah. I think an interesting thing about you when you talked about essentially listening to that customer voice that's out there in terms of prioritising services, and I think that is absolutely the right way forward. I think there's a danger that was highlighted to me in a conversation last night in the way that you go about that. You referred earlier on to some of the sort of maybe the sort of middle class component or the kind of I forget how you described it earlier on, but certainly we've got careers, we go on nice holidays, that sort of comment that you were making earlier on.
The elite.
The elite, yeah. And I think that's probably a concept that sits uncomfortably with most of us, but compared to a lot in society, it's a good fit.
Yeah.
So interestingly, when you think about a program where you're canvassing the opinions of those out in the public space, this conversation last night was quite eye-opening, really, because if you think about the people that may have the time to respond to that, the people who may have time is the most precious commodity, so I'll stick with just time, actually. They may have the education as well, maybe, that makes them more eloquent in the way they put their point forward. But certainly you potentially introduce a bias into the system because the people that have time to react are those that are more affluent, that those who've got they represent the minority of the population. So they perhaps, if you're not careful with the way you go about that data gathering exercise, that engagement exercise, perhaps you put bias into the data set that you're gathering and then bias into your service provision, and that comes with its own dangers. So it comes with a real health warning around being careful about how you capture that data and thinking hard about the community element of it.
Thank you. And Girish and Caron,
creating
space.
I'm dying to say something here because one of the things I think we really need to embrace is actually starting to work together and stop working in our silos. There's far too much money spent doing the same thing over and over again, slightly different way when actually it shouldn't be. And embracing IT shared services, for example, in a much more fundamental way, really, that it reduces the overhead of any operational service. So I think really we should be looking at where are the cross-cutting opportunities, what are the things that we should be doing that actually has true reuse and can be done across the public sector. And actually in any business area, it doesn't really matter where it is, but I think they're the sorts of things that actually will start to make a big impact on reducing the financial overheads for running any service.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, the challenge is within the organisation, and lots of stuff's been said about, reusing of technology, the data and the culture stuff. And I think there's a cultural issue. I think the demand on IT is just growing at a rate that it's difficult to manage. And we're looking for technical solutions to solve budget problems, which I still believe the technology will help us get there, but it's not going to solve it if we don't take the people with us, or we don't look at how we deliver our services. So there's one we were talking about last night where I found out last week, because I'm looking at a mail and print digitisation project, and I found out last week that we get PDF invoices in. Tracey touched on it earlier. And we get paper invoices. We've got a person in a mail room printing off the PDF, scanning it with a barcode on, so that it can be posted to our finance system. Nobody's got no idea why we're doing that, because it was something that was done when, I don't know. And it's things like that we've got to uncover and understand what that process is. And there might be something very simple without buying some new technology.
Yeah.
That'll save us a resource, might streamline something. So I think, it goes back to technology is not the answer to everything. I think technology is going to help us get there, but it's challenging the organisation around the behaviours and how can we streamline stuff.
It's interesting what you say about that challenge in terms of that's down to leadership, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of what you've outlined in terms of your use cases, your case studies on how it is you've delivered improvements are about a clear bit of leadership that says, I want to save £90,000 per letter that goes out, or I want to make a difference in the way that Northern Ireland citizens interact with services. It's about clear leadership, and therefore it's about the leader. And there are a lot of leaders in this room, right? We don't have one or two leaders in our organisations. We have hundreds. So it's about leaders in our businesses walking around asking why an awful lot more than perhaps they've done historically. Yeah. Just that's a powerful question.
One of the I guess for all four of you to draw on what you've said, one of the great happinesses of my career is that I've seen incredible innovation and good practice and people working together across silos and pulling together new services on a multi-organisational basis. And one of the great sadnesses of my careers is when I go back 5 years later, it's not there anymore.
That's right.
Because one of the people changed. One of the chief execs and one of the organisations left. And I think what I've realised over the years is that we need to create partnering organisations where the whole organisation acts and thinks in a collaborative way rather than just a present project that we're working on. And I think it's harder to work in collaboration than ever before because budget cuts lend us towards feeling a little bit hurt and being a little bit mistrustful and feeling that we've got internal issues to deal with rather than take the broad strategic view. I'm on my fourth chief exec job and I've got lots of things wrong. I always say one day I'll do the job right. But the one thing I hope I've always got right is that I speak well of other organisations within my own organisation. When I was a local authority chief exec, if I just went to committee or I went to my management board and I slagged off other councils or I slagged off health or I criticised the police or I doubted the honour of our housing sector, I was just training my organisation not to trust them, actually. And in the end, I realised I have to be the advocate for police, housing, health in my own organisation, and I've got to create an atmosphere that I trust them and they trust me, because leaders may be the biggest impediment to collaboration. And sometimes we only follow our own pet project rather than creating collaborative organisations that trust others. Do you agree with that, or am I?
I do. No, fundamentally.
Any other thoughts on that?
I think it's a huge challenge, isn't it? We recently revised our corporate strategy, our values and behaviours. Spent a lot of time doing that with staff again. New chief executive asking the questions. What's it like to work in this organisation? What are the issues that you think we need to tackle? a lot of time and effort into meeting with hundreds and hundreds of staff, getting that feedback, distilling it back to them, agreeing that's what it was, turn it into a strategy, communicate it out, personal letters. But then that's not good enough. You can't just do that and stop. It's about, you say all your leaders, directors, chief exec, heads of service, team leaders, living this on a daily basis. And whenever actually you see the opposite behaviours, those that are damaging, so like that example of trust in other organisations, it's down to us to challenge that and deal with it there and then. Not go away and stew about it and think about it and think, oh, well, that wasn't good, but actually tackle it and model the right kind of behaviours. And ultimately, I have to say, there may be some people in an organisation that can't make that change and therefore perhaps ought to be going to work somewhere else. I think you have to be as radical as that.
And something perhaps for Girish and Caron, how do we make sure people can take a bit of risk as well? Because that's the other thing, isn't it? We need to be permissive. I've always wanted to have Failure of the Year award at our staff awards, and everyone says, well, it's just because you want to win something, Rob. But which I must admit, I think there's a fair amount of truth in this. But how do we create a permissive arrangement where we're going to try a lot of stuff, a lot of it will work, we've got an appetite for risk? Any thoughts on that from the two of you?
The only thing I would say is that I think we're all risk takers at the end of the day, but some people are much more unlikely to take a risk than others. And it really is understanding the level of risk that you want to engage in. So, in terms of developing any new service, for example, you're empowering the people that are working together to actually do something in a different way. So if you're working in bite-sized chunks and small pieces of value creation, it's actually easier to take a bigger risk because you're not going to fail big. So you fail in small ways and then you learn and you move on. So that's a really good way to actually introduce a risk culture into designing new services. I'll let other colleagues add other things.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think, we don't like taking risks, do we, in local authority? It's really, really difficult to manage that risk. And the way we've tried to do it more recently with some of the stuff that we've been working on is actually try and work with the service and bring them with us and help them take small steps, but also look at case studies where other people have done it. I think it's really difficult if you're trying to do a wholesale change and there's not the appetite to take the risk, but we have to make the change happen to support the outcome or the budget cuts and stuff like that. And I think it's really difficult that when you talk about robotics and AI and stuff like that, where we know that's going to be a change to somebody's role, we know that we're going to remove a service, especially in large admin areas, for example, where we are looking at robotics, and there might be 10 people processing something, and they know that we're coming to speak to them about, well, how do you do this? But how do you keep them engaged? And it's about saying to them, actually, we need to take this risk because the organisation needs to change, but we still value what you do, and we're going to retrain you and look at doing something different with you. We're going to upskill you, actually, and take away this mundane thing. And that's just at one level, and those risks, I think, throughout the organisation exist every single day. I think what we've also done, going back to the earlier question, we've got the Smart City office in Leeds, where we have health and the university working with us, and we have some joint objectives in the city to deliver a single record, for example, to look at connectivity across the city, to look at innovation across the city. So we are taking those small steps, but I think we're a long way off still, and it's a cultural thing.
Yeah, no, great. Well, look, what a fantastic session, and thank you so much, the four of you, for your contributions. Hand back to Gary now in order to just deal with the housekeeping arrangements. But can we thank the panel for their